which I'm sure they will. So, um, okay, I think we can get started here. So let's dive in. This is the second in our Sang Lucci and Wall Street Jesus Overcoming Resistance in Trading webinar series. I'm Charlie Bathgate. I'm a partner here at Wall Street Jesus and Sang Lucci, and I am joined by someone I'm very excited to bring in and have talk to you guys today. His name is Chris Cady. And we're going to get into Chris's bio here in a second, just as a quick refresher on why we're here and what we're talking about. This whole series is a lead up to the next session of the Sang Lucci Master Course, which starts December 9th. We'll talk more about that later. But this concept of resistance is something that has been brought up a lot for us and from our students, from the people in our community, from people who are attending our webinars. And resistance is really any force that is originating from within our minds that's stopping us from doing what we want to do. So self-doubt, procrastination, fear of failure, attachment to our egos, fear of taking losses in the market, fear of letting go of a trade. This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about, and the kind of stuff that really determines trader behavior that we're trying to help you guys understand how to get a little more control over. So that's why we're here today, learning how to manage your mental state a little bit more. And there's no better person to talk on this subject than Chris. So I'm going to let Chris introduce himself here and give a little bit of his background, both in terms of trading, but then also your background, Chris, as in meditation and your sort of study of the mind. So let's start with that.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. We're just going to try and take a lot of my experience and hopefully give you actionable progressions, maybe to help you move past stumbling blocks that we all experience. It's not just you. You have to know that, and I'm sure it happens to everybody. My path started in 1980. I was the youngest member of the New York Stock Exchange, and then I went in 1986 to the S&P and came back to New York in 1987. And I've been trading on my own since 1987, no paycheck. About 16 years ago, so the Tibetans were starting a program where they were going to choose 42 people to get their advanced teachers training as though it's their PhD level meditation training. I was one of the 42 people chosen. It went for 14 years. It was free. They were basically worried about going the way of the American Indian or the Eskimo. In other words, if they didn't have their knowledge put out into the open market, they felt as though it would go away. So I've really never taught or talked about it per se, but I'm here to help you today. And some of that knowledge I can share with you for sure, in relation to trading, of course.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. All right, guys. So we're gonna go deep into some stuff here. It might get a little bit heady. Some of this might get confusing. So feel free to type questions throughout into the chat, and we will definitely do a Q&A at the end, because I'm sure people will have some questions for Chris about what the hell it is that we're talking about. So let's start out. And Chris, we were doing our prep yesterday, and we were talking a little bit about your perspective on what your job is as a trader. And can you just articulate some of what you have said and how you view your job as a trader in order to give yourself the best shot at being successful on day to day?
Yeah, so Victor Sprandio would always say your job is to be able to come back tomorrow. Pete Stottlemyre would always say that it's an organic process that we need to be in step with. Other people say it's a roller coaster, and you have to choose where and when you get on and off the roller coaster. Other people will say some days they give away money, so the idea is to be here when they give away money.
Right.
In other
Keep
words,
your seat at the table.
yeah,
Right.
keep your seat at the table for sure. And
Right.
so our job is not necessarily to be right. Our job is to function in an environment where we come out at the end of the day with a profit. And so that may mean that we're wrong a lot more than we're right, but we're going to be quick to admit our losses, so that we can keep our seat at the table.
Right.
And
Right.
remember, we
Not blow up.
not
Right.
blow
Not
up.
blow up. Be present there so that you keep your seat at the table so that when the market does, turn in your favor, you're there to take advantage of it. And
Right. You
yeah.
remember we were saying that there are so many inputs to the present moment that we can't see, that kind of gives us the ability to admit we're wrong and forgive ourselves without damaging our self-esteem and being able to come back and hit the mouse again, right? We need the ego strength to hit the mouse.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah,
then,
and so I think one of the things that we hit on yesterday, and when we were talking about what we want to talk about today, is you were saying, the fundamental position that a trader finds himself in is that a trader's trying to predict the future when there's a very low probability of success, right? So everyone who sits down to trade is staring down the barrel of essentially confusion and uncertainty, right?
yeah, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about like your sort of perception of that and how you navigate in that environment that is for most people extremely unsettling on a day-to-day basis?
Um, Understanding, right, that we're facing long odds. They say 8 out of 10 people lose everything. 10% break even. That means 10% of the people make all the money. And a lot of people experience anxiety when they're confronting a confusing situation,
Right,
which is basically your job as a trader, right? You cannot know, so you have to be by definition somewhat confused about the outcomes. Thank God there's only up or down as an outcome. Um, but so the idea is that when we're facing a confusing situation, we have the choice of experiencing anxiety, or you have the choice of saying, I'm going to learn something new. And that's, we could call that curiosity. So you need to be able to have a mental blueprint of saying, in the morning, I'm going to learn something new today. I'm going to choose curiosity rather than anxiety. If you feel
right,
anxiety, it's possible that you're trading too large, and you should
right,
back it off, right? And so a lot of people will say that you can get your step back by being active, being and so with the new micros, maybe you back it off and you trade smaller and you trade more to kind of get your feeling of being back in step. But the predominant thing that you need to be aware of is when facing a confusing situation, you need to choose curiosity over anxiety, period. And
right,
remember to frame it in the positive, right? I am choosing curiosity as a positive rather than I'm avoiding anxiety, right? It's a conscious positive choice rather than a default negative choice.
and this idea, and this is something that we hit on in the webinar on Tuesday with Ranchero, this concept of choosing curiosity over anxiety. This is something that, in my experience, working with a lot of very, very high level professional traders and people who are high performing in other disciplines,
Right.
they choose anxiety. Sorry, they choose curiosity.
Curiosity,
They
right.
choose to not, and that enables them to um, go deeper into their craft, to take risks, to explore, to not take things so personally. Whereas that anxious mindset really does sort of shut down a lot of your cognitive abilities, which you obviously need in order
Remember,
to,
we're
to perform at your best.
we're talking about making sure that your self-esteem remains intact,
Right,
even though your performance may fluctuate from situations that are out of your control,
right,
right?
right. And
So
so,
the
and
self-esteem that you're generating about how you feel about yourself is coming from inside you, so that you're choosing curiosity. It's a conscious choice in the face of uncertainty, and so that you're going to be quick to forgive yourself because there's so many inputs to the present moment that you can't see,
right,
right? So that
right,
you could say, oh, well, that happened. I couldn't see that coming. There was no way. So I need to be able to still be able to come back and hit the mouse again,
right,
right?
right. And I think that this hits on a fundamental concept that anchors this sort of whole discussion that we're having, which is the matter of perception, right? That
Right.
everything, and like, let's go into the pen metaphor here that we were
Okay,
talking
right.
about yesterday.
Right.
This is a good one that brought a lot of it home today for me.
Yeah, and so I did not create this metaphor. This teaching it was taught by the Tibetan lamas. In many classes, if you see a real Tibetan lama, they will bring out a pen and they'll say, "This is a pen," and we all agree by convention, right? This is a pen. It writes. But if a dog walks in the room and I hold it down for the dog, Is it a pen or is it a chew toy, right? To the dog, it's a chew toy. To us, it's a pen. And the
Right.
Tibetans will then say, well, what is this? Is it a pen or a chew toy? And the correct answer is it's both, right? It's both a pen. It's both a pen and both a chew toy. But the idea is that what they're getting at is that how you label things, and that includes your emotions, your responses, how you label things is a critical factor in being able to see clearly.
Right.
And so the idea as a trader is we want to avoid the inner cheerleader, right? This trade's going good for me, or this trade's, I'm having a party because it's going my way. The idea is we're trying to see clearly. And so understanding the labeling process, is it a pen or is it a chew toy? And you are essentially labeling everything else that you do in your life. And the idea is that we need to try and recognize the labeling process before we attach an automatic label to that.
Right. Right. And so when it comes to the markets, you're essentially saying that there is, well, I guess how would you specifically like apply that to a move in the market, let's say?
It would be like, this move seems crazy, right? The market's doing something insane,
Right.
right? And so you're labeling it from a logical perspective that you have, right? You've now labeled this thing insane. And
Right.
so the idea is that there are other people, your competitors in whatever trade you're labeling as insane, are not labeling that as insane. So you have to recognize that these emotional responses that are making it difficult for you to participate in what you view as insane is a logical, your perceived subjective sense of logic is a label,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so
You are projecting your perception onto the markets, which is
right,
inherently biasing your perspective
right,
on what's happening, and it's disturbing your capacity to see clearly what's really
right.
happening.
Correct.
Right.
And so the understanding, as crazy as it sounds, you need to release yourself from logic.
Right. Can you go
Right.
into that a little bit more?
I mean, you can see it in everybody else, how they expect things to make sense all the time. And so practice releasing yourself from logic, practice admitting that you're wrong. Go home and practice with your wife or your girlfriend. As soon as you get a chance, just be like, hey, I'm
Right.
wrong,
Right.
right? And so that's the beginning of understanding that, the labeling process is a subjective element in your logical or analytical path.
Right.
And you
Right.
need just to be cognizant of the fact that you need to be at times be able to release yourself from logic.
Right. Right.
Don't
Okay. If you, let's say you're in a trade, right? You're putting in a feeler trade,
right,
and move is it starts moving against you. What
right.
would you say is sort of the typical reaction that a lot of traders have that is detrimental to them, and what is the reaction that you strive to have personally?
Well, I mean, there's the typical is you buy a stock at 10, it goes to 9, you're like, it's so cheap. You buy more at 8, at 7, you're like, I can't believe it, how cheap it is. And then at 4, you have what's called forced awareness. I think Mark Douglas talked about that, where you want to avoid that forced awareness at all time.
Mm,
Never, so of course that's why they always say don't average down. It killed more people than whoever, right? And so,
right. So that forced awareness is a moment when the market is basically slapping you so hard across the face that you accept what's happening.
right, your
Right.
girlfriend comes home and she says that she's met another guy or something. You haven't been paying attention to the signs, and then all of a sudden, the size of the loss is so great that you're
Mhm.
forced to become aware. And so, Mark Douglas, who wrote a couple books, great books, they are talking about avoiding. You want to make sure you avoid forced awareness at all costs. The
Right.
Now flipping back to how I'm getting into a trade. We were talking yesterday about a great term we called scarification. If say I'm buying something, the same sort of thing, and we know that as traders, we're just generally going to be early because we're paying more attention. We're using our feel and technicals or whatever probability maps or AI or whatever you're using now. Um, you're going to be early generally rather than late. So you need to make sure that you have an understanding that because you're early, the trade's going to go against you somewhat. And so the term is scarification, not mine. My friend Paul said that, where we have a thick enough skin to make sure that we have the ability to sustain the move against us before it goes our way.
Hmm.
The art form in that is, of course, making sure that you don't have too long of, you use both time and price in that to determine when you're wrong, right? If the price moves against you and then moves back your way very quickly, that is a positive sign. If the price moves against you and stays against you, that's obviously a negative sign, right? And
Right.
so everybody has their own threshold, and as they become better at timing and better at scarification, you'll be able to trade more size more effectively, I think.
Right.
But
And so
the
this concept of scarification in terms of like, how our perception of reality is really just a projection. You're saying that sinking into that mindset of everything that I'm constantly labeling my environment, I'm projecting onto my environment. If you let go of that, then you're more able to kind of build up that thicker skin, that scarification. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that that's a critical element. If you're tired, if you haven't had enough sleep, if you're hung over, if you've had an emotional situation, be careful, because you don't have the necessary mental armor to sustain that scarification.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
Once you have the trade on, and we're assuming that it's going your way, because the only course of action if it's not is that you're getting out. So once the trade starts to go your way, then Pete Stottlemyre used to say that it was constantly one of those situations where you had to reevaluate the trade as it was happening, because there were times when you may discover, hey, there may be more to this trade than I originally thought.
Hmm.
Right. So,
Right.
so there is the fact that you are still engaged in the present moment. You are using your tools. You understand you're balancing that sort of inner cheerleader, right? You're making sure that you're not having a party, that you're not going, oh, this is good for me or this is bad for me. And you're balancing that with the understanding that prudence dictates exiting a winning position long before the highs or the lows if you're short, right? And so
Right.
the understanding of that prudence dictates exiting a winning position long before your highs. But again, no inner cheerleader. Also understanding that as the trade is unfolding, that you have the ability to adjust your parameters per se. And then Pete would also say that the only reason we get out of a trade is when we find a better trade, which is an interesting concept. So if you're in a trade and you see a better trade, you can get out of the trade you're in and then go do
Right.
that better trade.
Which is facilitated by just being in this state of um, having let go, basically, of your perception of what's right and what's wrong, right? Just
Right.
constantly listening to the feedback of the market.
Right. We're going to remember, we're coming back to the curiosity, right? We're curious, right? We come to work because we're curious to see if you, my brother's a doctor in San Francisco, and he was an emergency room doctor, and he's his thing is the Golden Gate Bridge, and he talks to people who have survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge trying to kill
Whoa.
themselves. And so
Right.
he says that the people who on the suicide hotlines there, the only thing that they can tell the people who are about to jump off the bridge, the only thing that they can tell them or ask them is, don't you want to see how it's going to work out, rather than kill yourself, right? And so in a bizarre way, it's like
Right.
take that mindset to the screens, right?
Right. Right.
Like if it's tough, if it's tough, right? Well, let's just, default back to, let's just see how it's going to play out, right? And so
Right.
that keeps us in a positive mindset. Remember
Right.
that we're always trying to think the mind thinks in pictures. So the idea is we're always telling ourselves what to do rather than what not to do. The pink elephant, right? If I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, right? You think of a pink elephant. So
Right. Right.
always, when you're trading, always frame it in the positive, right? This is what I'm going to do rather than this is what I'm not going to do.
Well, and this idea of you hit on something yesterday when we were talking about this that I think is really important is letting go of your own perspective facilitates you being able to see things from your opponent's perspective, right? Which gives you a lot more insight into your trade. Can you
Right. I
talk
mean,
about that, like that concept of almost empathizing with whoever's on the other end of the trade,
right.
seeing
Like
things from their perspective?
you have to make an argument for the other side of the trade. You construct their viewpoint in your head, and then you weigh it against your viewpoint as though you're at a cocktail party and you're trying to talk to somebody about what the market is or do, or some sort of political argument or something like that. But construct the argument for your opponent in the trade. If you're long, construct the argument for the shorts. If you're short, construct the argument for the longs. That, I think, is super helpful, just to understand that your own sense of self is a projection. And right, your
Now we're
own,
getting into it. Now
yeah,
we're getting into it.
your
Yeah.
own
Right.
sense of self is a projection. And so in meditation, which is a discipline and that comes with a cookbook, a
Right.
progression on how to get there, that's their job, is to see without illusion. And the big step in that is to see that the sense of self that you have is a projected illusion. And
Right.
right. And so,
Well, and yesterday, I mean, let's just go deep down into it in terms of what you've learned, from Tibetan tradition. Like
right,
the concept of self as an illusion, you were saying yesterday, your physical self, people identify with your physical self, right?
right, right,
But, if I cut off your arm, you're still Chris, right?
right,
If I cut off your legs, you're still Chris.
right,
People identify with themselves professionally, but
right,
if I take your job away, you're still Chris, right?
right. Yeah.
So we get ourselves wrapped up in these ways to anchor our identity, but in reality, it's all entirely a projection, right?
It is completely a projection. That doesn't mean
Right.
that if you step out in front of this, in the street, you exist. You'll get run over by a car. But
Right.
and I see you as Charlie.
Right.
You exist to me as Charlie. But in my
Right.
case, Chris, as from my own sense of Chris, is a projected illusion.
Right.
And so the understanding of that is that if I'm a projected illusion in my trades, the actions the actions are your thoughts create your behavior. Again, your thoughts create your behavior. So you need to make sure that you're thinking clearly, seeing clearly before you hit the mouse. And so the
And if you're able to like let go of this concept of your not be holding on so hard to your sense of self, then your
right,
ego is not going to be so biased towards decisions that you make, right? So when you're
right,
in a trade, instead of being like, I made the decision to pull the trigger on this trade, I need to be right because my
right,
sense of self is anchored in my ability to be right, my success, I'm proving this person wrong and whatnot, all the baggage that we all bring to the decisions that we make.
right,
It's really, you're much more able to let go of that and just say, what is the argument that I would make for this trade? What's the argument for the person who's on the other side of this trade?
right.
Who's right? Who has more evidence in their favor?
If you're really wrapped into uh, the ego or the pride, remember the Irish pride that we're
Hmm.
talking about. If you're really wrapped in, it's harder to unwind it, right? If you're more uh, shall we say, more in step or less involved in your own perception of a particular concept, trade, idea, you're much more nimble, and so you're quicker to adjust. Remember, we were talking about transitional coping skills.
Yeah, I think this will be very interesting because a lot of people who are in here, who are in our community or in this audience, come from non-traditional backgrounds, right? And Chris was saying something that's very interesting to me yesterday about people who do not come from a pedigree of Ivy League schools and investment banks and whatnot. Chris, can you tell me a little bit about, like, let's talk about why you were recruited as one of the first traders, on
Um,
the stock
be,
exchange.
because in 1980, there was the understanding that if you went to an Ivy League school, or say you went to East Coast private school, then went to an Ivy League school, then you went to one of those Chicago grad schools, or you went to Columbia grad, or you went to London School of Economics or something like that, and then you came out, you were basically told your whole life that this is the way things are done, and all the people before you have been very successful, and just follow in their steps, and we've taught you the right way to think. And
Right,
so you're kind of stratified in your thinking. So among the guys on the floor, they were looking to hire ski racers, athletes of some degree. Say in my background with ski racing, if I cartwheeled 5 times in a GS, I would dust myself off and say, I'm going to change my technique, right? And it's
right,
just, how quickly can you change your technique? So the
right,
understanding that you tried, you failed, you're going to try something new, versus somebody who had been taught everything and this was the way it was done. The markets, of course, required the better, in the psych terms, are transitional coping skills. So,
Right.
so that's for all of us who have non-traditional backgrounds, if you ever have to go to an interview or job interview or anything, just tell them that you have epic transitional coping skills from your
Transitional,
non-traditional.
just drop that phrase and you'll be good to
Yeah,
go. I got good transitional coping
transitional
skills.
coping skills, right? And from a
Right.
non-traditional background. And
Yeah, and
so,
I think, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I think we all know people who have come from certain pedigrees. I mean, I certainly know a lot of people like this whose identity is really anchored in the fact that they went to a certain school and they worked for a
yeah,
certain company, something
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And when you think about it in the context of trading, and just what we were talking about letting go of this concept of your identity, yourself, your ego, and in terms of making nimble, smart decisions, it makes a lot of sense that people who have bounced around, who've tried a lot of different things, who don't come from those kind of backgrounds, could be a lot better at traders. So that I think would be encouraging for a lot of people who are in our audience who probably didn't come from some of those those
yeah. I
backgrounds.
mean, there's that thing where we have no other choice, right? How have we survived, right? Because this is what we do, right? We have no other choice. And so
Right,
that's a great motivating factor in surviving. Um,
right.
so uh, the understanding that also, from the non-traditional backgrounds, remember we were talking about the two great Irish sins, the pride and privacy, right? So
Yeah,
they're right,
explain that, unpack that for people for a second, for the
there's
non-Irish in the audience.
yeah, right. That apparently the two great Irish sins are pride and privacy, and so uh, there may be cultural elements uh, to your behavior when trading
Hmm.
that you may not consciously be aware of that have come from what Alice Miller wrote, the book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, where you're talking
Hmm.
about, that your grandparents handed traits to your parents who handed traits to you unbeknowingly. So
Right.
that you may be trying to unwind certain behaviors that were really not your fault to get.
I mean, that was something that was really interesting for me when we first started everything with Sang Lucci. I was living in the loft in the financial district with Lucci and our business partner Pete, who, Lucci comes from, an Indian background. Pete is Chinese. I'm white, obviously, and our backgrounds in many ways could not have been more different. But seeing how that affected our behavior and our decision-making processes, and then seeing how we all sort of bounced off one another and molded one another as a result of working together so much,
Yeah.
and how we let go of some of the biases that we had was really an important process for us. I know for those guys as traders, for me as an entrepreneur, that was really helpful. So I think that's something that we encourage everybody to do in the master course constantly. And in the steam room, people talk about it as like understanding, doing that introspection and that investigation into why do I think about things? Why do I think about myself and the way I do? What are the patterns in my family, in my my culture and the traditions that I have that might
Right.
be influencing how I think about things?
Right. And so, again, I will just say, practice admitting you're wrong with people in your lives so that you can do it quickly. If you practice your admitting you're wrong and you see that other people actually view you in a greater light, then you'll maybe be able to get out of losses quicker without having any damage to your self-esteem,
Right, right.
which is
Yeah.
an interesting
And
point.
I think that one of the things that I mean, one of the most important things that you have to be able to do that resistance shows up with the strongest for traders. One of the most important things that you have to do is be able to let go of a loss, of a losing trade, right? And be able to do it quickly and to not resist losing,
Yeah.
letting go of a losing trade.
Yeah, it's like what trees don't grow to the sky. Not every story has a happy ending, right? We have to make sure there, no matter, we were talking about, if I really, really want something like the book, The Secret is magical thinking, right? We need to make sure that we avoid magical thinking and face the facts that we can't be perfect. And so,
Right. And guys, I know we're covering a lot of ground here, and I know we got questions, so we're gonna move on to the Q&A here in a second. But this leads me to one of the last things that we talked about yesterday, Chris, was this concept of generating your self-esteem from an internal reference point versus an external reference point, right? So
Yeah.
people, can you break that down, that concept?
Yeah, and part of that is from the meditation background, where they're getting to you in meditation retreats. This part takes about 10 days of quiet before you get there, where you're
Quiet
trying.
meaning silent meditation, no speaking.
Right,
I mean, how many
yeah.
times have you done that, by the way? Just out of curiosity.
I did 14 years. I did a month a year for 14 years, and then I've done
In
long
silence.
in silence. In silence, no
That's
coffee.
completely insane. No
Right,
coffee. Yeah, that was the
no
hardest part,
coffee.
right? No coffee.
Yeah.
Not the no talking, the no coffee. Okay,
And
go.
and
Go ahead.
avert your gaze. If you're there with other people, you're supposed to look
Mm,
down. And if you need
wow.
anything from, there are attendants, right, who cook and do stuff and are, help you if you have a problem, like
Mhm.
a medical problem, and you can only write on a pad of paper to communicate. Um,
Sorry, I
so
interrupted you,
yeah,
but
no, that's all
internal
right.
versus
So,
external
yeah,
self-esteem.
so if we're in a situation where you need to, the idea is we're unpacking the idea of how do I see myself versus how other people, am I a people pleasing person
Hmm.
versus am I ethically sound?
Hmm.
If I'm more ethically sound, then I'm probably going to be able to feel better about myself without having a billion likes on social media or other people liking me, right? The
Right.
idea, right? Like a good therapist would always say,
Or needing gains, needing profit, needing a positive P&L.
right? The idea is that you had a plan, in trading, right? You had a plan, whether it worked or not, you still acted in a way that you feel proud about yourself. And so
Right.
you structure your life in a way so that there are rules, like in rules for society, right? We have the 10 commandments, we have the laws of the government, we have rules in trading. So you need to respect those time-tested rules. And when you do, you'll feel better about yourself. And then you'll have a better sense of self-esteem. You'll be able to recover from losses, and you'll be able to hit the mouse quicker to make the money back rather than punishing yourself, right? We used to see people on the trading floor punish themselves for losing money, where other people could come back right back and make the money
Right.
back. So yeah, and a good therapist would also probably say the same thing. Like, it's way more healthy to be able to generate your self-esteem from an internal reference point than an external reference point.
Right. Right. And that will just that begets so much more control over your behavior, right? So
Self
much more resilience. I mean, that facilitates
self-confidence,
self-confidence,
right,
exactly. Which, I
right,
mean, which is, and everybody here knows this. I mean, trading is just a jackhammer. It's gonna pummel you. You don't
right.
need to give it any extra fodder. We talked about this in the webinar with Ranchero. I mean,
Yeah,
Lucci talks about it all the time. Like, trading is gonna beat your ass. You don't need to give it any extra, any
right.
extra help.
Right,
Yeah.
the scarification, the understanding that you're going to be wrong, the pressures that go with increased size as you're trying to ramp it up, just the day in, day out concentration, right? All of these are almost superhuman. We're becoming, to become a good trader, you're becoming a very evolved human being.
Right. Which is something that I think Brett Steenbarger does a really good job of talking about that in one of his books, in the outset of one of his books called Trading Psychology, or
Mhm.
sorry, The Psychology of Trading. And he
Right,
talks about one of the reasons why people trade. Yeah, they do it to make money, right? And that's job number one. You're there to make money. But one of the reasons why people start to define their lives by it, and it becomes a part of their identity, and they return to it even after they've made a lot of money,
money, right,
or they keep on pushing forward with it. It becomes their craft. It becomes such a huge part of how they evolve as a person, is because it requires so much of you, right? I mean, to really do it well, do it consistently over time, it does require so much of you. And I think that is one of the things that we see a lot for people in the master course. So much of what, like, the feedback that actually makes a huge difference for us is, yeah, seeing people make more money and really understand how to read tape and trade options like that. That's all fantastic and that's huge. But one of the things that moves the needle for us in terms of continuing to provide this education is people being like, I can't believe how much I've evolved as a person, and how much I've pulled from myself and how much I can get out of myself. I didn't realize I could
Charlie.
do these things. And that's really,
That's
really cool. That's what we're
yeah,
here
that's
talking about.
really, really well put. And so to just make sure, just a couple people, right? Remember, just choose to be curious rather than anxious. Try and stick a fork in the automatic labeling process just a little bit, right? Just before you automatically label something, just try and get a split second of like, I have the choice to label something this way rather than automatically label it an emotional response.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
the idea just starting, right? That's just the very beginning. Just try and stick a fork in that automatic labeling process and try and choose curiosity. Like I'm going to learn something new whenever you feel anxiety, right?
Right.
If you feel anxiety, say I'm going to learn something new. Also, use your breath as a function of measuring your mental state. If you find yourself holding your breath, definitely you're not thinking clearly. So
Right.
even if it takes, like I used to write on the top of my trading card, breathe, because you'd put on a position, you find that you're holding your breath, and that's not going to be a state from which you are flexible and able to adapt in an ever evolving environment. So,
Right.
right. So if we can only remember three things at a time, let's remember to write down breathe or use it as a mental sort of thermometer. The understanding of choosing curiosity and I just forget the third one. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. It's been a long
Right.
day.
No, I mean, I think those two things are extremely helpful for people. And I think we've talked a little bit in the past about journaling, right? Trading, journaling, writing. I mean, that's something that you can do to really generate a lot of self-awareness, especially for people who are out there trying
Yeah.
to dig into like, okay, what are the forces that are, influencing how I think about things, how I think about myself, just continually writing about things and reflecting about, the decisions that you made, why you think you made them, can be really, really powerful for generating that.
I do think that would be helpful in the sense of having a progression. The third thing was delay the labeling process, stick a fork in the labeling process.
Got it.
Um,
Got it.
that automatic labeling process. And the idea is that if we could do it this way, is like we give you some sort of small little mental leaps to make, and then you can write the progress that you do or make or don't make down in those regards. And when you're ready for the next three, you come back and we do that. The idea is that there is a progression here, right? You can get better. People have done this. And
Right.
so it is not, we're not making this up, and it's just that we're applying it to trading. And we have
Right.
between us, between all the people around, you have a lot of experience.
Right.
So, yeah, journaling works. Um, I have friends who are therapists who say, I must be a horrible therapist. And I'm like, why? And they say, because people say they're going to change, and then they come back next week and they haven't changed. And
Yeah.
then we talk about it, right? And then the people say, I'm going to go change. And the therapists are like, well, why is it that people don't change? So
Yeah.
there must be something out there that makes it difficult for people to change. And
Yeah.
so, understand that there is probably more fear in regards to being able to step through to that new behavior than we're particularly addressing or realizing.
Right. Um, Very well said. All right, we've covered a ton of ground here. And so we're going to take some questions. We got a lot of really good questions from people. Um, there's no way that we can encapsulate all of Chris's knowledge in this context. So we've asked Chris to come and teach two guest classes in the Sangucci Master Course, which he has graciously agreed to do. So that's very exciting. Everyone who's in the course, people who signed up, a year or two ago, people who are new this session are going to be able to come learn directly from Chris. He's going to be going deeper into these concepts. He's going to be teaching, some meditation techniques about how to like really apply this stuff in your in your own life. So that's on top of obviously the live sessions with Lucci, with the live trading sessions with Ron Chero in his trading the post methodology. I mean, we're really trying to put together the most comprehensive education you can get as a trader so that you have all the tools that you need in order to do this on your own. That starts on December 9th, the next live session. So if you want to check out more information on that, get a really good sense for what we're all about, you can go to 3ltplaybook.com. That's the number 3ltplaybook.com, and that'll guide you through into the course page for the master course. So definitely check that out, and let's get some questions here. We've got a request. Okay,
Charlie, just real quick, the idea for what we're trying to do is we're trying to make trading a flow state experience. Okay, just
Right.
like surfing, just like skiing, just like when anybody gets absorbed into a flow state experience, even in meditation, right? That's a flow state experience. That's what we're going to do here in this what we're trying to do here.
Right, right. And so we got a couple questions here that are like, what are specific techniques, like, I don't know, meditation techniques that you might be able to prescribe to people, just people who don't have a lot of meditation experience, that you can say, if you want to, if they buy into what we're saying right now, what can they go do and kind of start putting this in practice?
John Yates writes a great book on shamatha, named, the book's name is called The Mind Illuminated. It's a killer cookbook on the beginning building blocks of meditation, shamatha practice. If you don't want to read the 300 pages, just try and spend 5 minutes in the morning just watching the breath pass in and out of your nose. See if you can do it 10 times. I mean, without your mind wandering, like hold the focus. And most people have a hard time getting past 5. And the idea
I've been meditating for 15 years at this point, and I would say most days I don't get past 5. Then my
5,
mind,
right?
yeah,
And so the
which is
idea
part
is,
of the game. Yeah.
right, the idea is that they didn't make it that you choose watching the breath come in and out of your nose because it's so boring. Right.
Right.
The idea is that you'll see your mind start to run places. And so the idea is that people train their bodies like crazy at the gym, right? I go to asana, I ride my bike everywhere, but you need to be able to train your mind. And it is like a little puppy dog, and chitta vritti nirodha, right? The mind is always running. And so you
Right.
gotta make sure that you just put in the effort at least to try and train the mind so that you can have a flow state experience, whether it's trading or doing skiing, surfing, riding your bike, falling in love, whatever is a flow state experience.
Right, right.
So
Which I mean, it's a whole different conversation, but those are peak experiences, peak level of just what it feels like to be in that place, but also peak performance, right? If you
yeah,
really
yeah,
want to be performing at your
yeah, yeah.
top
I mean,
capacity.
and just to quickly, right? Any seated position, sometimes even with your back against the wall, they're always particular about having a straight back, as though it allows the, the channels, as they call, to move energy clearly between your head and the rest of your body.
Right. Okay.
So, and even lying
And
down, they say is okay.
And I mean, one thing that everybody says when they first start trying to meditate is they're like, I can't do this because I can't do 5 breaths in a row without letting my mind interrupt. And,
Mhm.
right when I start doing it, I'm thinking about whatever my grocery list or this fight that I had or, what I got to do for my job or something like that. And that is the point, and that's okay. People have to understand that the point is just to constantly let go of those distractions, the monkey mind, and to constantly let go of it. That's the name of the game. You're going to be doing that for your entire meditation career, right? I mean, you never get to the point. Well, maybe some people do, but it's very rare that you get to the point that your mind is just a crystal clear lake. But you
Time
will
out,
get to
time
the
out.
point.
It's
I'm
not
sorry.
that hard. It's not, don't scare people off. You
All
can
right,
do
all
it,
right.
right?
Well,
You can
well,
do
well, I'm
it.
not trying to scare people off. I'm saying that I think people get scared off because they're like, they are shooting for a goal that is actually not necessarily the goal, right?
Yeah.
The outcome that they're aiming for is not actually the point.
And so, inevitably, when your mind wanders, you have to make sure that you don't punish yourself for that. You want to say, oh, you want to reward yourself for recognizing that your mind has drifted. So you frame it in
Right,
the positive, right? You're like, oh, look, I just discovered that my mind is wandering. Let's try and go back to the breath. And so not punishing yourself, and just be curious. Be like, oh, look, hey, I made it 4. Let's maybe I can make it 5. breaths. And so consider it like a self improvement. You don't have to tell people, just do it yourself, and you'll see that you're making improvement. And it's always fun to learn something new, right? It's like, well, if you decided you wanted to learn to snowboard or kite surf or something, right? It's like you're learning something new, and that's part of being human.
Right, right. Okay, we got a couple more questions here, and guys, if you have more questions, I'm sure that there's things that you want to know. We can't go too deep into this in this context, but we'll try and answer as much as we can. Can you repeat the name of the book describing inherited identities and thoughts? That's The Drama of the Gifted Child, right?
Yes, Alice
Yeah,
Miller.
Alice Miller. Okay.
Yeah, it's a super thin
Um,
book.
yeah, and that is a book. I mean,
No,
I've I've
Drama of the Gifted Child, right?
yeah, is that what we said? I
Yeah,
thought
Drama of the Gifted
yeah.
Child by Alice Miller.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, if I said something else, that's what I meant. That is a book that is widely recommended by some of the people who I have the highest amount of respect for in terms of their understanding of human nature and the mind. There's a psychiatrist who's an expert in addiction, whose name is Gabor Mate, who I think understands what drives people to do what they do better than anybody, and that's one of the top books that he recommends. So you guys should check that out. From Hamza, at what point would you recommend that a trader step away from trading completely for the day rather than spiraling into bigger losses?
I've seen Mark Fisher put a hard stop on all of his traders. He was the guy from MBF Clearing. I think uh, I think what you do first of all is get small. Um, as soon as if you make one trade that's wrong, um, take a look at generally you should be right or scratching a lot. And so if you're wrong and something, I mean, I get that we're early, and so we're gonna have trades move against us, and there are times when news comes out, and these are not really reasons to stop yourself. It would be the reasons to stop yourself would be you have a hard, non-negotiable opinion about the way something should be, and you're trying to reflect that in the market, and you're out of step, then you need to walk away. Um,
Mm,
Other people have a hard money stop. Um, I don't. Other people have sort of a mental exhaustion. My stops generally tend to be both time and price. Um, but yeah, it's something that's a great question, and it happens to be related to the size of the amount of money that you're trading, the size of each individual trade. If you're trading size and back it down, this guy Dave Stone, he was an incredibly big trader on the floor of NYMEX, always said that when you're cold, trade more. And so I would say when you're cold, trade more at a very smaller size to get back in step.
right. Okay. Yeah, and that's something we've talked about. We talked about yesterday is this idea of like you want to build confidence, right? You want to build
Yeah,
momentum. So,
yeah.
racking up smaller wins and continuing to do that will really help you, be in a position to take down those bigger gains.
Right. I have a card sitting here right here on my desk. It says sometimes better to not trade.
Right. Yeah. Also a very difficult thing to learn.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we got time for one more. Advice for young people who are facing a career choice, how to deal with fears associated with trading.
Um, Fear functions. I mean, it's valid, and it's there for a reason, right? You got afraid of the tiger, and you ran, and so you need to respect fear. Um, it means that you're somewhere important generally, and it does mean that your concentration is higher. What fear does present you with is sometimes a rabbit hole, as Charlie was saying. It's like you're not necessarily thinking about all your possible alternatives to a situation if you're frozen or you're extremely stressed. Um, and I've been there, so I know. And so sometimes it's good to ask people who are older than you, who have been around, um, and who you treat as a teacher that you've investigated. You just don't take advice from people you haven't investigated. But
Right.
yeah, fear functions, and I am sympathetic to your situation. I wish I had a more specific understanding of your problem, but I
Right.
don't.
And Ove, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right. You know, if you want to shoot me an email, charlie@sanglucci.com, with more specifics, we can try and help you
Yeah.
kind of navigate the situation that you're in. All right, guys. I hope this has been helpful. Again, the Sanglucci Master Course starts December 9th. If you want to check it out and learn more about like what we're really all about, you can go to 3ltplaybook.com. Check that out. We're gonna have 2 extra classes with Chris in this session, which I'm extremely excited about. We're gonna go way deeper into a lot of the stuff, which I think will be extremely helpful on the trading psychology front. So, um, you know, awesome. Thank you,
Thank
Chris,
you.
for taking the time to do this.
Yeah. Good luck, you guys. Keep it up.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for being here.